Imagine a missile fired by a rebel group in the Red Sea, and then, thousands of miles away, a daily wage worker in a Mumbai slum suddenly decides to pull their child out of school.
Right, which sounds like an impossible butterfly effect.
Totally impossible. But today, we are actually going to trace the exact geopolitical and psychological mechanics that link those two events. So welcome to your morning deep dive.
Glad to be here.
If you are a UPSC aspirant listening to this, you already know the daily news stack is just completely overwhelming. So our mission today is to decode all that noise. We're going to look at the underlying mechanisms behind today's events and, extract the precise analytical frameworks you need for your prelims, mains, and essays.
Yeah, and to frame how we analyze the stack today, there is a specific thought that applies across all our topics. Governance, security, society. You can actually use this directly in an essay paper. It's institutions are only as strong as the trust placed in them by the people they serve.
I like that, the trust placed in them.
Exactly. Because everything we discussed today, from digital infrastructure to international borders, it all comes back to that central tension of trust.
Okay, let's unpack this. We are starting right there with the breakdown of trust in our domestic institutions. Let's look at the entrance examination system, specifically, the aftermath of the NEET UG paper leaks.
Right, which was a massive shock to the system.
Yeah, it's like a pressure cooker right now for aspirants. But the government's response isn't just about shuffling bureaucrats this time. They've assembled this high-powered task force led by Nandan Nilekani, alongside experts from ISRO and cybersecurity.
Which is a huge signal.
Right, because our current exam system is basically like trying to secure a vault by just adding more padlocks to the front door, while completely ignoring that the walls themselves are made of paper.
That's a great way to put it.
And Nilekani isn't coming in to just add another padlock.
No, not at all. And when you're analyzing governance reforms, especially for your written answers, you have to look at the mechanism of the proposed solution. Nilekani he's synonymous with digital public infrastructure, or DPI.
Well,
he architected Aadhaar, right?
Right, the whole foundational digital identity layer.
Exactly. So DPI here means moving away from a system that relies on human integrity, which, let's face it, is where the leaks happen, to a system built on verifiable digital identities, decentralized data storage, and immutable audit trails.
And the ISRO inclusion is fascinating.
Yeah, it suggests they are likely looking at highly secure, encrypted, point-to-point satellite transmission of exam papers, directly to testing centers just minutes before an exam begins.
Oh, wow. So you completely eliminate the physical transit vulnerabilities. No more trucks full of paper boxes.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. They are attempting to rebuild institutional trust by basically taking the human element out of the logistics entirely. Fast-track courts are also part of this, and of course we saw the resignation of the union education minister.
Which is a massive infrastructural and political shift. But that shift was essentially forced by a complete breakdown of trust on the ground, right? The physical protests at Jantar Mantar and across the country acted as the catalyst for all this.
They absolutely did.
And the source material has this really detailed analysis on the mechanics of crowd control during these events. It reveals a critical failure in traditional policing.
What's fascinating here is how outdated our doctrines are. The traditional doctrine of policing a protest is just physical containment. Put up barricades, deploy personnel, restrict movement.
The classic playbook.
Right. But the analysis points out that physical containment without political engagement just creates an echo chamber of frustration. And when you look at high-profile events like activist Sonam Wangchuk's recent hunger strike, the dynamic completely changes.
These are the internet.
Exactly. We are operating in the camera eye view era. Every single participant is broadcasting live. So if the police simply use physical force, that footage is instantly weaponized online. It mobilizes thousands more.
Right, so the barricades actually become a broadcast studio.
Precisely, and this is why modern policing is shifting toward digital intelligence. It is no longer about managing the crowd once it forms on the street, it's about predicting the crowd.
Which means monitoring them before they even show up.
Yeah. Law enforcement has to monitor online sentiment, track network mobilization, understand the digital footprint of a protest way before a single person steps out their front door. It requires a completely different rules of engagement matrix.
So wait, predicting a crowd based on online behavior? That opens up a whole different can of worms regarding digital governance, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
Because the BJP parliamentary panel just raised alarms about how Gen Z protests are organized. They're pointing to algorithm biases on platforms like Instagram and X, basically arguing that these algorithms intentionally amplify polarizing content, and fake news just to keep users engaged.
Right, which accelerates the real-world mobilization we just talked about.
Exactly. So how is the state handling that?
Well, we are seeing the state deploy a dual approach to this whole digital environment. On one side, the parliamentary committee is pressuring METI, the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, to legally bind big tech to algorithmic transparency.
So forcing them to show how their code pushes content.
Right. They want the platforms held accountable for the real-world consequences of their code. But simultaneously, state security apparatuses are taking unilateral action. Like the Indian Cybercrime Coordination Center, the I4C, they recently ordered GitHub to remove repositories for a decentralized messaging app called BitChat.
Okay, let's break down what BitChat actually is, because the tech here is super crucial. BitChat operates on Bluetooth mesh networks.
Yeah, which is a very specific type of architecture.
Right, so for the listener, this means the app doesn't need cell towers or an internet service provider to function at all. Instead, every single phone with the app acts as a node. It bounces messages off other nearby phones in a continuous chain.
It is inherently decentralized.
Yeah, so if there's a government-mandated internet shutdown, BitChat still works perfectly fine.
And that is exactly why the I4C targeted it, because it circumvents centralized internet architecture, it evades state surveillance and lawful interception. The government used Section 69A of the IT Act, citing sovereignty and security, to mandate the takedown.
But doesn't this clash with basic digital rights? I mean, banning a tool solely because it is built to function offline seems like a massive overreach. A mesh network is also a lifeline during natural disasters when cell towers go down.
That's a very valid counterargument.
Right, like if you ban the underlying technology just because bad actors might use it to organize a riot, you are stripping law-abiding citizens of a vital communication tool. Doesn't this fail the basic legal tests we study for individual rights?
It does, and that tension is the core of any digital rights argument you're going to write for mains. You have to ground this in the Supreme Court's 2020 judgment, Anuradha Boston v. Union of India.
The Kashmir internet shutdown case.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That ruling explicitly laid down the doctrine of proportionality. It established that any restriction on digital communication must be necessary, it must be temporary, and it has to be the least restrictive measure possible.
So taking down the whole app repository.
Right. Digital rights advocates argue that banning an entire open source repository like BitChat is like banning the construction of roads just because criminals might drive on them. It is disproportionate.
It's the classic friction between state security and individual liberty. And, that friction doesn't just stop at our digital networks. It scales all the way up to our international borders.
It really does.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's look at the strategic dilemma India is currently navigating with China. The sources present two sharply contrasting viewpoints on this.
Yeah, a real tug of war.
We have a powerful business lobby arguing for a reset in economic ties. They claim our technology and manufacturing sectors are stalling because we restrict Chinese components and investments. But on the flip side, a leading editorial is advocating for absolute strategic patience.
Right, and the editorial's argument rests on this concept of asymmetric dependency.
Which means what exactly in this context?
Basically, if you integrate your supply chains with a hostile neighbor just to boost short-term GDP, you give them a permanent lever to cripple your economy during a geopolitical crisis.
Right, you're handing them the kill switch.
Exactly, and look at the strategy China employs on the border, what we call salami slicing. It's these incremental, non-kinetic territorial grabs. They take a few meters at Depsang, a valley in Chumar, build infrastructure in Doklam, provoke clashes like Galwan.
So it's constant pressure.
Yeah. And if India resets economic relations while this military pressure continues, it effectively normalizes those border incursions.
It essentially signals that India will separate business from sovereign integrity. And the historical context provided in the sources reinforces why that's incredibly dangerous. It points to China allegedly providing tactical satellite data to Pakistan during Operation Sindoor in May 2025.
And that covert support is the key variable here. It means the threat isn't just a border dispute in the Himalayas anymore. It is a coordinated two-front security challenge.
Which changes our whole defense posture.
Absolutely. Raksha Mantri Rajnath Singh recently underscored this reality during his speech at Dras on Kargil Vijay Diwas. His rhetoric was absolute. Any future bilateral dialogue with Pakistan will only be regarding the status of Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, or POL.
A very hardline stance.
Yes, but the real mechanism to counter this two-front threat isn't just rhetoric, it's industrial policy. That is where Atmanirbharat Bharat comes in.
Right, the push for self-reliance.
Exactly. Achieving 65% indigenization in defense manufacturing is not just about boosting local factories. It's about insulating our military supply lines from the exact kind of asymmetric dependency the editorial warned about regarding China. Compare that to Pakistan's reliance on proxy warfare, and the contrast is stark.
So we are trying to secure our terrestrial borders through domestic manufacturing. But a massive chunk of our economy relies on what happens in international waters. And right now, the maritime choke points are incredibly volatile.
Yeah, the oceans are definitely heating up.
I mean, a merchant vessel, the MV Ragnar, which had 4 Indian seafarers on board, was just attacked at Ukraine's Odessa port in the Black Sea, which prompted an MEA advisory.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the Black Sea incident is just one pressure point in a much larger, frankly, collapsing maritime security architecture.
Right, because look at the Middle East.
Exactly. We are currently seeing a fragile 2-day pause in hostilities between the U.S. and Iran in the Strait of Hormuz, which was brokered by Omani diplomacy. But simultaneously, Iran-backed Houthi forces are threatening a complete blockade of the Bab al-Mandeb Strait near the Red Sea.
To understand why this matters, we have to look at the geography. The Bab al-Mandeb Strait is this incredibly narrow channel between Yemen and Africa. A huge percentage of the world's energy and goods flows through there to reach the Suez Canal.
It's the ultimate choke point.
Yeah. If the Houthis block it, shipping companies have to reroute their massive cargo vessels all the way around the southern tip of Africa. It adds weeks to the journey and millions of dollars in fuel and insurance costs.
And those costs don't just vanish, they are passed directly to the importing nations. This is exactly where global geography triggers domestic macroeconomic headwinds for us.
So what does this all mean for the listener and, the Indian economy?
It's a perfect storm. Because of the risk in the Strait of Hormuz and the Red Sea, global crude oil prices have spiked back to $100 a barrel. For an energy-importing nation like India, this immediately widens the current account deficit, it weakens the rupee against the dollar, and it essentially imports inflation into the domestic economy.
And it isn't just energy costs, right? The trade uncertainty is compounded by these regulatory shifts we're seeing, like the unpredictable tariff threats from the U.S. under Section 232.
Right, which is a provision allowing them to restrict imports based on their own national security interests.
Exactly, and they are currently looking at applying this to Indian generic pharmaceuticals. Meanwhile, on the financial front, the Central Board of Direct Taxes, the CBDT, has just issued a 198-page guidance note mandating massive reporting requirements for crypto assets.
Yeah, they're aligning with the OECD's Crypto Asset Reporting Framework, or CARF. They are basically building a global net to catch tax evasion as wealth moves into decentralized digital spaces.
So those are the macroeconomic and regulatory consequences. But I want to bring this back to how this actually affects the citizen on the ground. This brings us back to the scenario from the very beginning of our deep dive.
The daily wage worker in Mumbai.
Yes. The geopolitical instability in the Strait of Hormuz has caused a very real, tangible LPG cooking gas shortage in India. And the sources offer a fascinating sociological layer here. Using CMIE data, they explore a behavioral economics concept called scarcity.
Oh, this is a brilliant concept for GS1.
It really is. When an urban migrant worker is suddenly faced with a severe shortage of cooking gas, their cognitive bandwidth is entirely hijacked by that single crisis. The brain enters a state of tunneling.
Yeah, and tunneling is a crucial concept. It means that when humans are subjected to acute scarcity, whether it's a lack of money, food, or in this case, fuel, the brain biologically prioritizes short-term survival over literally everything else. Long-term planning capacities just shut down.
Exactly. So that daily wage worker in Mumbai isn't thinking about preventative health care or saving for next month's rent. They might even pull their child out of school just to stand in line for gas, or to work a menial job to afford black market fuel prices.
Right, because the immediate crisis consumes all their bandwidth.
Yeah. The cognitive trap of scarcity prevents them from making decisions that would benefit their future. So a geopolitical maneuver involving a strait in the Middle East directly triggers a psychological and economic trap that deepens urban poverty in India.
That synthesis connecting international relations to macroeconomics to behavioral sociology, that is precisely the kind of multidimensional thinking required for complex policy analysis in the exam.
Okay, we have covered a vast amount of ground, but there are a few highly technical, rapid-fire developments in science, environment, and culture that we need to decode before we wrap up. Let's look at the global AI race.
Always moving fast.
Yeah. China has just released a new open-source AI model called Kimi K3, and they are doing this despite intense U.S. sanctions, restricting their access to advanced graphics processing units, or GPUs.
And the mechanism behind how China is bypassing these restrictions is the interesting part here. Advanced GPUs process vast amounts of data simultaneously, which makes AI training highly efficient.
Right, but they can't buy them.
Exactly. Because China can't buy these chips, they're using a brute force computing method. They are linking together massive clusters of older, much less efficient chips. Now, this requires an astronomical amount of power, but they are leveraging their heavily subsidized, abundant domestic electricity grid to absorb the cost.
So they are substituting technological sophistication with sheer energy consumption.
Exactly. Just brute forcing it.
It's a fascinating workaround. Contrast that with what is happening in Europe, where Danish scientists are taking the exact opposite route, extreme precision. They're using something called photonic quantum computing merged with AI to design personalized cancer vaccines.
Which sounds like sci-fi.
It really does. For the listener, a standard computer uses electricity to process bits of data as either a 1 or a 0. A photonic quantum computer uses particles of light photons to process data in multiple states at once.
And that capability is revolutionary for healthcare. Designing a cancer vaccine requires analyzing millions of complex protein structures, specifically peptide combinations, to find the exact sequence that will trigger a patient's immune system to attack a specific tumor.
Which would take forever normally.
Yeah, a classical computer would take years to run those calculations. A photonic quantum computer can analyze the vast combinatorial space of peptide design almost instantly.
That's incredible. Now, bringing it back to domestic health tech, India's drug regulator just made a landmark decision by approving Ginga, the country's first dengue vaccine.
Yeah, and while this is a massive milestone, you must understand the clinical mechanism for your prelims. Qdenga is a tetravalent vaccine, meaning it is designed to protect against all 4 strains or serotypes of the dengue virus.
Okay.
However, clinical trials revealed a critical danger: antibody-dependent enhancement.
What does that mean in practice?
Well, if the vaccine is given to a child who is seronegative, meaning they have never been exposed to the dengue virus before, the vaccine antibodies can actually help the DNV3 strain of the virus enter the body's cells more easily.
Wait, really? It acts almost like a Trojan horse for that specific strain.
Exactly. It poses a severe risk of hospitalization for kids who haven't had dengue before. Because of this mechanism, the government cannot simply roll out the vaccine in a mass campaign.
They can't just give it to everyone at school.
No, they have to implement a rigorous, mandatory pre-vaccination blood screening for every single child just to check their serostatus, which is a logistical nightmare for our public health infrastructure.
That is a vital caveat to remember. Let's shift our focus to the environment really quickly. The sources highlight an incredible conservation effort in Jaisalmer at the Godhawan Center. 3 endangered great Indian bustard chicks have been placed in a 9.25 crore rewilding tunnel.
And rewilding is fundamentally different from simply keeping animals in a zoo. The mechanism of a rewilding tunnel is to slowly expose captive-bred chicks to the natural environment while strictly isolating them from human contact.
So they don't get used to people.
Right. If they imprint on humans, they lose their natural predator evasion instincts and they just will not survive in the wild. The tunnel allows them to acclimatize to the desert ecology safely before their eventual release.
It's precision conservation, basically.
Yeah.
Finally, the sources provided a look into several recent grassroots and strategic initiatives from the government. The Prime Minister's Viksit Vibrant Village programs aims to develop border villages, reframing them not as the last outposts of the country, but as the first line of defense and development.
That's a big shift in perspective.
Yeah. And alongside that, recent highlights from the Man Ki Baat address focus heavily on sustainable infrastructure. There is the Catch the Rain campaign, which emphasizes aquifer mapping.
And aquifer mapping is critical for water security. It is the scientific process of using geological surveys to identify porous rock layers underground. Once you know exactly where these underground reservoirs are, you can build targeted rainwater harvesting structures to inject water directly into those specific geological formations.
So you're efficiently recharging a groundwater table rather than just letting the rain run off into the ocean.
Exactly.
The address also highlighted the commissioning of the indigenously built warship INS Mahendragiri, representing the hard power of Atmanirabharat, alongside soft power pushes like the revival of local crafts, specifically Tripura's Chungprang string instrument and Kashmir's Vagu mats under the Vocal for Local initiative.
When you synthesize these initiatives, from mapping underground geology to indigenizing defense manufacturing and protecting cultural heritage, they form the structural pillars of the Viksit Bharat 2047 vision. It's a blend of hard security, ecological resilience, and cultural continuity.
All right, let's pull all of these threads together. In this deep dive today, you have examined the architectural shift from padlocked exam halls to digital public infrastructure. You've traced the conflict between decentralized mesh networks and state surveillance. You've seen how China's salami slicing forces massive domestic manufacturing shifts, and how a blockade in the Red Sea hijacks the cognitive bandwidth of a worker in Mumbai. Finally, we looked at the sheer processing power of light particles fighting cancer and the careful rewilding of the great Indian bustard.
And as you continue your preparation, I want you to consider the duality of the tools we've discussed today. We've seen technology operate as the ultimate threat through untraceable communication apps, AI-driven misinformation mobilizing crowds, and asymmetric dependency on foreign hardware. Yet we've also seen it presented as the ultimate savior through leak-proof digital exam infrastructure, quantum peptide design, and precision aquifer mapping. The central question you will face as future policymakers is this: in the long run, does our national security depend more on regulating the technology itself, or on strengthening the moral and institutional framework of the people wielding it?
That is a brilliant note to end on. Keep that question front and center in your mind as you study. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep synthesizing the information, stay curious about the mechanisms driving our world, and above all, stay prepared. We will catch you next time.